Let me start this video with a number so large and so precisely documented that it demands you stop what you're doing and give it your full attention. 2/3 of American consumers are currently living paycheck to paycheck. Not 1/3, not half, 2/3. That figure comes from the PIMS Intelligence Paycheck to Paycheck report, the most comprehensive ongoing survey of American household financial behavior available, drawing on data from over 2,400 U.S. adult consumers surveyed through early 2026. 2/3 of Americans. That is approximately 176 million people who have told researchers, informally conducted surveys using established academic methodology, that their financial life is structured around the period between paychecks. When the paycheck arrives, the bills are paid. When the bills arrive, the money is gone. In between those two events, there is no buffer, no margin, and no safety net. The PIMS report also documented that within that 2/3 population, approximately 20 to 25%, representing roughly 40 to 45 million Americans, say they are consistently struggling to pay their monthly bills, not just living close to the margin, struggling, actually failing regularly to meet their monthly obligations without some combination of debt accumulation, bill deferral, or assistance from family and government programs. And a September 2025 PIMS analysis titled "Why Paycheck to Paycheck Consumers Can't Weather a $2,000 Shock" found that only 48% of consumers overall said they were very or extremely confident they could come up with $2,000 within 30 days. Among those already struggling to pay bills, that number falls to 15%. Let that settle. 15% of the most financially fragile Americans, the 40 to 45 million who are consistently struggling to meet their monthly obligations, have high confidence they could find $2,000 within 30 days. 85% cannot reliably find $2,000. The cost of a single car repair, a single medical emergency visit, a single month's rent in most American cities within 30 days. That is not one paycheck away from ruin. That is already at the edge of it. And the energy seizure, the mortgage rate pressures, the credit card debt at 21% APR, and the stagflation environment this series has been documenting for months are all converging on those 85 million people simultaneously. This video is about what the paycheck to paycheck data actually shows, who it is affecting, and why the population has grown rather than shrunk despite economic headline growth, what the specific mechanisms are that have converted what used to be a working class phenomenon into an experience that 40% of Americans earning over $100,000 per year now share, and what it means for the American economy when 2/3 of its consumers are too financially fragile to absorb a single unexpected expense. Let me give you the complete data picture that most reporting on this topic misses because it focuses on the headline percentage without examining the demographic composition that reveals the structural nature of the problem. PIMS found that 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck in early 2026. The Civic Science data, published March 5th, 2026, found that 76% of Americans have little to no safety net, with 21% reporting they have zero funds remaining after each paycheck, and 55% saying they have only a little left over for savings or non-essential purchases each month. The WealthView analysis, updated 3 days ago, May 4th, 2026, found that 60 to 65% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, including 40% of those earning $100,000 or more annually. That specific data point, 40% of households earning over $100,000 per year living paycheck to paycheck, is the most analytically important finding in the entire body of American household financial fragility research. It means that paycheck to paycheck living is not fundamentally a poverty problem. It is a spending structure problem. A household earning $120,000 per year can have a $2,000 monthly mortgage payment, a $700 car payment, a $500 student loan payment, $300 in credit card minimum payments, and $800 in housing-related costs, which leaves approximately $3,000 to $4,000 per month for food, utilities, clothing, healthcare copays, and savings. In a city with average grocery costs, utilities, and transportation expenses, that budget is sufficient for comfortable living, but leaves almost no margin for unexpected expenses. A single medical emergency, a car repair, or an HVAC failure can wipe out or exceed that household's monthly discretionary surplus. And in the current environment, where gasoline is $4.16 per gallon, where groceries are 15% more expensive than 2020, and where health insurance premiums for ACA marketplace plans have risen dramatically, the monthly deficit before any unexpected expense is already larger than it used to be. The paycheck to paycheck experience has climbed the income distribution not because higher income Americans became less responsible, but because the cost of living has escalated faster than income at every level of the income distribution simultaneously. The Ramsey Solutions, Q4, 2025. State of Personal Finance report found that 51% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and confirmed that over time, the proportion living paycheck to paycheck by necessity has overtaken those doing so by choice, necessity, not lifestyle. Not spending choices, the economic pressure of inflation, rising housing costs, rising healthcare costs, and rising debt service costs is the driver. That structural reality is what makes the paycheck to paycheck crisis different from every previous period when financial fragility was measured at comparable levels. Let me show you the four-stage pattern through which economic shocks have historically converted the paycheck to paycheck population from a stable condition of tight budgeting into an acute condition of financial collapse. Because understanding the stages is the key to understanding where the current population sits in the cycle and what the Iran War's stagflation shock means for the progression. Stage 1 is the margin compression. This is the period during which rising costs gradually eliminate the buffer that paycheck-to-paycheck households had available between their income and their essential obligations. Inflation reduces the real purchasing power of each paycheck. Rising energy costs add directly to the non-discretionary spending that cannot be reduced. Rising rent and housing costs add to the largest fixed budget item. And rising debt service costs from credit card debt at 21%, APR consume an increasing fraction of the paycheck before any discretionary spending begins. Stage 1 is not dramatic. Households adjust by cutting back on dining out, on entertainment, on clothing purchases. They delay car maintenance. They stretch insurance renewal payments. They use credit cards to bridge the gap between when bills arrive and when the paycheck arrives. Stage 1 looks stable from the outside and feels increasingly precarious from the inside. Stage 2 is the buffer depletion. This is when the adjustments available in Stage 1 have been fully exhausted, and the household begins drawing down whatever small savings it accumulated. The PMITs. September data found that consumers struggling to pay bills had just $2,336 in highly liquid assets, a 27.3% decline over the prior 16 months. That 16-month decline in liquid assets is Stage 2 happening in the data. The buffers are being depleted. The savings that might have covered a minor emergency are being consumed by the normal monthly cost structure that has become unsustainable. Stage 3 is the debt cascade. This is when the buffer depletion has exhausted available savings and the household begins using revolving credit to cover essential expenses. 60% of American credit card holders are now carrying a balance month to month rather than paying in full, according to TransUnion and Bankrate data for early 2026. The average individual credit card balance is approximately $7,000, as the debt trap video in this series documented in detail. When a household in Stage 2 depletes its $2,000 savings buffer and needs to pay a car repair or a medical bill, the credit card is the mechanism of last resort. At 21% APR, the balance that arrives in Stage 3 does not diminish. It compounds. Stage 4 is the cascade collapse. This is when the monthly minimum payments required to service the credit card balances from Stage 3, combined with the continued margin compression from Stage 1, exceed the household's available income. Missed payments accumulate. Late fees at $32 each, restored after the CFPB's $8 cap was vacated in April 2025. Add to the balance. The credit score declines. The available credit limit is reduced, and the household is formally in financial distress, appearing in the delinquency statistics that the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, PIMTs, and TransUnion report quarterly. For the 45 million Americans who told PIMTs they are already consistently struggling to pay their monthly bills, Stage 3 or Stage 4 is the current reality. For the remaining portion of the two-thirds living paycheck to paycheck, the Iran War's stagflation shock is the event most likely to push them from Stage 2 buffer depletion into Stage 3 debt cascade in the second and third quarters of 2026. Let me prove this four-stage pattern with three historical examples that show precisely how external economic shocks have converted the paycheck-to-paycheck population from a stable condition into an acute crisis, because the historical comparisons define both the magnitude and the recovery timeline. The first example is the 1979 to 1982 stagflation period, which is the closest historical analog to the current environment. Oil prices doubled in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution. Consumer prices surged to 14%. The Federal Reserve raised rates to 20% to fight inflation. The paycheck-to-paycheck population, already large due to the energy costs of the 1970s, experienced a rapid conversion from Stage 2 buffer depletion to Stage 3 debt cascade as the combination of higher energy prices, higher interest rates on existing variable rate debt, and the recessionary unemployment that followed the Volcker tightening arrived simultaneously. Personal bankruptcy filings increased sharply. The number of households unable to meet minimum debt obligations reached levels not seen since the Great Depression. The recovery, when it came, required 5 years of declining oil prices, declining interest rates, and sustained economic growth. The lesson for 2026 is about the timeline of both deterioration and recovery in a stagflation environment. The deterioration is faster than people expect because the compounding of stage 3 credit card interest at 21% APR erodes the household's financial position every month, even without any new adverse event. And the recovery requires not just lower energy prices, but also lower interest rates and sustained income growth, none of which the current Federal Reserve policy environment is providing. Check. Verified. Undeniable. The second example is the 2020 to 2021 pandemic fiscal response, which is the most recent demonstration of what happens to the paycheck-to-paycheck population when emergency income transfers are provided at sufficient scale to pause the four-stage progression. The stimulus payments, the enhanced unemployment benefits, the PPP loans, the student loan payment moratorium, and the eviction moratoriums collectively provided the paycheck-to-paycheck population with a government-funded buffer that reversed stage 2 buffer depletion for tens of millions of households simultaneously. The PYNTS data tracked this reversal in real time, showing paycheck-to-paycheck rates declining during the periods of maximum fiscal transfer. When the fiscal transfers ended, the paycheck-to-paycheck rates rebounded to their pre-pandemic levels within months, and then exceeded them as the inflation that the fiscal transfers had partially contributed to eroded the real purchasing power of paychecks faster than incomes could adjust. The lesson for 2026 is that the current paycheck-to-paycheck levels, 60 to 66% of Americans, represent the post-pandemic normalization plus the inflation effect plus the energy shock effect. There is no comparable fiscal transfer program in place for 2026. The political and fiscal environment does not support one. And the $39 trillion national debt with net interest payments exceeding the defense budget means that the government's capacity to provide the type of emergency household income support that temporarily reversed the pandemic's paycheck-to-paycheck progression is more constrained than it was in 2020. The third example is the 2022 to 2023 inflation shock, which is the most directly applicable recent precedent for what happens to the paycheck-to-paycheck population when energy prices surge and remain elevated for an extended period. When gasoline reached $4.34 per gallon nationally in June 2022 after the Russia-Ukraine war, the PYNTS data showed a sharp increase in the paycheck-to-paycheck rate, as the energy cost surge pushed households that had been maintaining a thin positive budget margin into negative territory. The rate peaked at approximately 68% in August 2022 and began declining only in mid-2023 as energy prices fell and the labor market tightened enough to produce meaningful wage gains for lower-income workers. The lesson for 2026 is about the sensitivity of the paycheck-to-paycheck rate to the energy price level. The current gasoline price of $4.16 per gallon is already within 20 cents of the June 2022 peak that produced the 68% paycheck-to-paycheck rate. If the energy seizures stage 3 physical shortage phase produces additional energy price increases in May and June 2026, as the diesel and fertilizer disruptions arrive sequentially, the paycheck-to-paycheck rate will move back toward or above the 68% peak that was the highest recorded level before the current crisis. This is the moment I want to stop and speak directly to you. If this analysis is showing you the paycheck-to-paycheck crisis as the structural foundation of the American economic vulnerability that this series has been documenting from the top down through banking stress, bond market pressure, and energy seizure, this channel is built for exactly this bottom-up perspective that completes the picture. Hit subscribe right now. Turn on every notification, because the household financial fragility data is the most important leading indicator of the consumer spending contraction that feeds into corporate earnings, that feeds into equity valuations, and that feeds back into the retirement accounts of the Americans who are in the paycheck-to-paycheck data themselves. Subscribe first. Then let me give you the specific economic transmission from 66% paycheck-to-paycheck to the corporate earnings and market outcomes this series has been tracking. Here is the specific mechanism by which the paycheck-to-paycheck population's financial fragility transmits into the broader economy and ultimately into the investment returns of every American who holds equities. Consumer spending represents approximately 70% of U.S. GDP. The paycheck-to-paycheck population, at 60 to 66% of Americans, is the primary engine of consumer spending because it represents the overwhelming majority of the workers and households whose income is spent rather than saved or invested. When the paycheck-to-paycheck population moves from stage 2 buffer depletion to stage 3 debt cascade, consumer spending does not fall to zero. It restructures. Discretionary spending, meaning restaurant meals, entertainment, vacations, new clothing, discretionary electronics, and home improvement, falls sharply. Essential spending on food, utilities, housing, and transportation continues, but at lower unit volumes as households seek lower-cost alternatives. The net result is the type of corporate revenue miss that this series has documented appearing in consumer discretionary company guidance, Norwegian Cruise Lines cutting guidance in Monday's earnings, retailers missing same-store sales estimates, fast food companies reporting traffic declines, subscription services losing subscribers. These are the first visible Stage 3 expressions of the paycheck-to-paycheck crisis in corporate earnings data. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York documented in February 2026 that 90-day credit card delinquency is at its highest level since 2021, with the steepest increases concentrated in the lowest income zip codes. That delinquency pattern is Stage 3 debt cascade becoming visible in the bank data simultaneously with the consumer discretionary earnings misses appearing in corporate results. They are the same crisis expressed in two different data sets. And the 66% paycheck-to-paycheck rate, sustained at this level for multiple years, and now being stress tested by an oil shock that has pushed gasoline to $4.16 per gallon, is the financial foundation of the consumer spending contraction that this series has been documenting from multiple analytical angles. Subscribe right now, turn on every notification, and share this video with every American who is in the paycheck-to-paycheck data and does not yet have the complete picture of how their personal financial experience connects to the energy seizure, the Federal Reserve policy trap, the credit card debt spiral, and the corporate earnings trajectory that determines the value of every investment account in the country. They are all the same story. This series tells it from every angle. Subscribe, and be here for every chapter. Let me give you the specific demographic breakdown that makes the paycheck-to-paycheck crisis most analytically precise, because the headline 2/3 figure obscures the specific population segments where the crisis is most acute and where the Stage 3 to Stage 4 collapse is most likely in the current environment. The World Metrics Paycheck-to-Paycheck Statistics Database, updated May 5th, 2026, documented the following differentiation. 79% of renters live paycheck-to-paycheck compared to 38% of homeowners. This gap reflects both the income distribution difference between renting and owning households and the specific financial structure that renting creates, in which the renter has no equity accumulation, no asset to sell in an emergency, and is fully exposed to rent increases that have outpaced wage growth in most American cities since 2020. 74% of hospitality workers live paycheck to paycheck, compared to 47% of technology workers. This sector gap reflects both the wage differential and the scheduling instability that characterizes the service sector, where hourly workers often do not know in advance how many hours they will work in the next week, making budget planning essentially impossible. 85% of households earning under $30,000 per year live paycheck to paycheck, 60% of part-time workers live paycheck to paycheck, and 52% of households cite housing costs as the primary reason for their paycheck to paycheck status. These demographic differentials define where the 40 to 45 million Americans who are consistently struggling to pay their bills are concentrated. They are overwhelmingly renters, service sector workers, part-time employees, and lower-income households. They are the Americans who have been most directly affected by the Iran war's energy price surge, who have the least ability to reduce their gasoline consumption because they live in car-dependent communities and commute long distances in less fuel-efficient vehicles, and who carry the highest proportional food cost burden because they spend a larger fraction of their income on food and cannot absorb a 15% grocery cost increase without making painful substitutions or going hungry. The 40% of higher income paycheck-to-paycheck households, those earning over $100,000 annually, are in a genuinely different financial situation. They have more cushion. Their $2,000 emergency expense can typically be managed through a credit card that they have the capacity to pay off within 1 to 3 months. They are statistically at Stage 2 buffer depletion rather than Stage 3 debt cascade. But their presence in the paycheck-to-paycheck statistics is the signal that the problem has become structural across the income distribution, rather than concentrated at the bottom of it. And the specific data point that 40% of six-figure earners are living paycheck to paycheck is the most powerful evidence available that the American financial fragility problem is not primarily about income. It is about the cost structure of American life, which has escalated beyond the capacity of income at every level to provide meaningful financial resilience. That cost structure includes housing that consumes 40 to 50% of income in many markets, healthcare that adds another 10 to 15% for families on marketplace plans, student loan payments that add 7 to 15% for the 38% of Americans who carry student debt, credit card minimum payments that add 5 to 10% for the 60% of cardholders who carry balances, and now gasoline and energy costs that have surged to new highs as the Iran war's energy seizure compresses every household budget simultaneously. The paycheck-to-paycheck crisis is not a personal finance failure. It is the arithmetic consequence of a cost structure that has outpaced income growth at every level of the income distribution. Subscribe. every notification. And understand the arithmetic before the next monthly expense cycle delivers another data point in the same direction. Here's the specific connection between the paycheck to paycheck data and the events that Friday, May 8th's non-farm payrolls report will reveal. The April payrolls report, arriving tomorrow, is the most important near-term indicator of what the Iran war's stagflation shock is doing to the paycheck-to-paycheck population's primary financial input, which is the paycheck itself. Sing. A strong payrolls report with job creation above 150,000 and unemployment holding at or below current levels means the income side of the paycheck-to-paycheck equation is still providing the regular input that is holding the two-thirds population at stage 2 buffer depletion rather than converting them to stage 3 debt cascade at greater scale. A weak payrolls report with job creation below 50,000 or with unemployment rising above 5% means the income side is beginning to fail simultaneously with the cost side's escalation. In a stagflation environment, the two-sided squeeze, rising costs and declining income, is the specific condition that produces the fastest stage 4 collapse. Every recession in the post-war era that has been accompanied by inflation has produced a steeper increase in financial fragility indicators than recessions occurring in deflationary or price-stable environments, because the falling income from job losses is compounded by the continued cost pressure from inflation rather than offset by falling prices. If Friday's payrolls report is weak, the 45 million Americans who are consistently struggling to pay their bills will see their primary financial support mechanism, employment income, begin to fail at the same moment that gasoline is $4.16 per gallon. Groceries are 15% more expensive than 2020. Credit card minimum payments are consuming $120 to $150 of monthly take-home pay at 21% APR. And insurance premiums have risen 8 to 18% in consecutive years. That convergence is not a theoretical risk. It is the documented arithmetic of stage 4 cascade collapse applied to the 45 million Americans who are already in consistent bill payment difficulty. Subscribe. And be here tomorrow when the payrolls data delivers its verdict on the income side of the equation. Let me close with the 3 specific actions that are available to anyone in the paycheck-to-paycheck population who wants to move from stage 2 or stage 3 back towards stage 1 or out of the cycle entirely. Because this channel is not designed to document financial fragility without providing the corresponding actionable framework. Action 1 is the debt cascade interruption, the most urgent and most impactful action for the 45 million Americans in consistent bill payment difficulty is the fixed payment lock-in strategy from the Debt Trap video in this series. The minimum payment on a $7,000 credit card balance at 21% APR declines month by month as the balance slowly falls, but the interest proportion of each payment stays at 90% until the balance is almost zero. The fixed payment lock-in sets the automatic payment at the current minimum payment amount as a fixed dollar, not a percentage of balance, so that as the balance falls, the proportion going to principal increases rather than decreasing. This single change, setting the automatic payment to a fixed dollar amount equal to the current minimum, saves approximately $10,000 in interest over the life of a $7,000 balance without requiring any additional income, any balance transfer, or any new financial product. It costs nothing to implement. It requires only logging into the credit card account and changing one setting. For the stage 3 debt cascade household, this is the difference between the balance continuing to compound at 21% indefinitely and the balance eventually being eliminated. Action 2 is the emergency fund microbuild. The PIMTS data found that paycheck-to-paycheck households struggling to pay bills had an average of $2,336 in highly liquid assets. That number suggests that many struggling households do have some liquid savings, but not enough to cover the $2,000 emergency that 52% say they cannot handle. The microbuild strategy sets aside any amount from each paycheck, even $25 to $50, into a separate high-yield savings account that earns 3 to 4% annually. At $50 per paycheck for 26 annual paychecks, the microbuild produces $1,300 in 12 months. At $100 per paycheck, it produces $2,600 in 12 months. Neither number covers every emergency, but both numbers change the stage 2 to stage 3 threshold significantly. The paycheck-to-paycheck household that has 6 months of minimum payments in a separate savings account has 6 months of stage 2 buffer before stage 3 begins. The household without that buffer converts from stage 2 to stage 3 on the day the unexpected expense arrives. Action 3 is the proactive creditor contact. As the 1929 protocol video in this series documented, the optimal time to contact a creditor, whether a mortgage servicer, a credit card issuer, or a medical billing department, is before a payment is missed, not after. Credit card issuers have hardship programs that reduce interest rates temporarily for cardholders who are experiencing financial difficulty. Medical billing departments have financial assistance programs. charity care programs, and extended payment plans that are available to patients who call before the debt goes to collections. And mortgage servicers have modification programs that are most accessible and most favorable to borrowers who call while still current. The proactive contact action costs nothing, takes a phone call, and can significantly change the financial outcome of the Stage 2 to Stage 3 transition. The households that call their credit card issuer, their mortgage servicer, and their medical billing department proactively when they see the financial pressure building enter every negotiation from a position of strength that is unavailable to households who wait until after the missed payment has already been recorded and the creditor relationship has shifted from partner to adversary. These 3 actions are available to every American in the Paycheck to Paycheck data, regardless of income level, credit score, or the specific stage of the 4-stage progression. They are free. They are legal. And they are the documented difference between the households that break the paycheck to paycheck cycle and the households that are broken by it. Subscribe right now. Turn on every notification. Share this with every person you know who is in the Paycheck to Paycheck data and does not yet have the analytical framework to understand their position in the 4 stages and the specific actions that interrupt the progression at each stage. 176 million Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 45 million are consistently struggling to pay their bills. 85% of those struggling households cannot find $2,000 in 30 days. The numbers are documented, the progression is predictable, and the 3 actions are available. Subscribe and use them before the stage you are currently in advances to the next one.